Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this RedGamingTech video we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, has popped up over the past 24 or so hours. And we're going to start things out with several pieces of Ryzen 3000 news. The first of which is a leak from Chipset. A well-known user on the forum has actually managed to grab hold of a Matisse sample, and they have been giving their opinions on not just the clock speed but also the performance. Now, because we are needing to rely normally on machine translation, exactly what is said can sometimes be a bit ambiguous. However, fortunately for us, the retired engineer, also known as Chikakawa, hopefully I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who I usually correspond with, frequently correspond with on Twitter. He's a really cool guy. I would actually recommend you go ahead and follow him. He's actually provided a translation of what was said during the thread. So I'm going to read out his quotes, and then we're going to kind of do some analysis. It's already year 9102. This is 2019 in reverse. For emphasis, overclocking is no longer just about the megahertz. If 5 gigahertz can't beat 4.5, then maybe its efficiency is more important. Previously, the 8350 at 7.7 gigahertz only scored 1200 in R15. That's a bit of a blow, dude. Why are you picking on that 8350 for? Anyway, the Ryzen 5 2600 under extreme tuning managed at 4 GHz-ish, which was 1400 points on Cinebench. So obviously what he's referring to here is that the 2600 at 4 GHz would be similar in performance, at least in Cinebench anyway, as an FX 8350 running at 7.7 GHz. In fact, it was actually faster. And then he adds, focusing on lower frequencies but higher efficiency is where the real fun begins. No need to, quote, chase 5 GHz. Even if you forcibly achieve 5 GHz, it may not perform better than 4.8 GHz. Further delving into the thread, the user goes on to say that the chip running at 4.4 GHz is actually faster than the i9 9900K. Furthermore, they go on to say that 5 GHz is possible, maybe with single thread. Before anyone starts jumping on the 5 GHz mark, or figure rather, do remember that this is one sample of the processor. So until we have these CPUs in wide circulation so that we can just go down to any hardware store and pick one of them up, it's very difficult to know whether these figures that he's getting anyway are a good indicator of what you can get on average. Furthermore, AMD themselves have actually provided a little hint, or I guess more of a tease, as to Ryzen 3000 overclocking. I'll link the PC Games N article in the video description, and they also give some insight as well into the chipset fan of the X570 motherboard. PC Games N asked Erin Mallarino, hopefully correctly pronounced, about overclocking for both Ryzen 3000 as well as the chipset itself. He responds that there's no comment just yet, but in 10 days we should be pretty good. This hints that at E3, which of course is taking place at June the 11th, we will get actually some further demonstrations of the Ryzen 3000 series CPUs, which is good. It means that it's not just going to be a Nave focused event. Hopefully AMD will provide some insight into exactly what these chips are capable of. I'm really hoping, for the sake of the average user, I know for some of you it may be super exciting what can be done with like liquid nitrogen or something more extreme, but you know, the average use scenario is not really capable of just keep pouring liquid nitrogen into the pot throughout your gaming sessions or your, you know, regular workloads. So I'd like to know what we can get on average with like a reasonable AIO. That would be quite nice, and also a decent air cooler and even a slightly more advanced water cooling loop. So obviously different silicon is capable of different things, so the silicon lottery is definitely going to come into play here, and we've already seen a couple of websites that are promising cherry-picked samples. I did cover that yesterday. So what about the fan? As many of you know, the original, or rather the older chipsets like the X370 and X470 had around a 5-6-ish watt power draw. This goes up to 15 watts originally, but from what Tom's Hardware said, they actually nuked a couple of PCIe lanes, which means it's now around the 11 or 12 watts. This is because of PCIe 4 as well as the overall increase in I/O for the motherboard. So according to what Malorino has said, he said that we know that there is some trepidation after some of the earlier motherboards that had this. He's obviously referring to the motherboards of old where the chipset fan sounded like a wind turbine. So making sure that this only turns on when necessary, and will be keeping it cool and quiet as well. There are also a couple of other reports from users floating around the internet who have got engineering samples that, yes, you can run the chip at best at 5 GHz for single thread, however, it is not all processor cores. And it does also seem to be very motherboard dependent. So in other words, if you have a very cheap B350 motherboard or something that is quite entry level, or even a more basic X570 board, that certainly could impact things. I once again would take clock speed information with a pinch of salt right now, and just because one CPU sample hits 5 GHz, 9 others may not even hit 4.7. Even single thread, just be aware of that. The second thing, however, and this seems to be more widely reported, is that memory overclocking for Zen 2 is very reasonable. 3200 MHz is of course officially supported, but we've seen many reports that 4000 plus MHz is good. In other words, it seems to be widely doable. So the memory controllers in this thing are very much more robust compared to, let's say, Zen Plus. I'm going to be very curious exactly what the compatibility is like. I've heard from several sources that memory compatibility has skyrocketed with Zen 2. But, obviously, traditionally, Samsung B-Die has been the memory to go for when you've got a Ryzen processor. And the problem is, Samsung, well, they're not producing it anymore. So, I'm really hoping that you don't need Samsung B-Die memory for this particular set of or series of processors, because otherwise, given that they're no longer producing it, the prices are going to start skyrocketing, particularly if all you can do in the future is just get it via eBay. So with any luck, you'll just be able to use a wider selection of memory and it won't be quite so picky. Next up, we're going to move towards the PlayStation 5, because the developers actually commented on what they're considering to be an almost insane level of processing performance with Sony's next generation system. And then we actually have some comments from another user who has posted on the PS5 subreddit. They claim to be a developer and they've had some experience or some knowledge of the SSD that's inside the system. The director of the Yakuza series was recently speaking on Sega Namer Broadcast, and during his interview they actually discussed some details of the PlayStation 5. And he believes that it's, quote, going to return to a programmable area where artificial intelligence and machine learning will be central. He said, even the PlayStation 5 is released, I think the PlayStation 4 will be the main focus for a while longer. The PlayStation 5 processing power is incredible. So when we try to think of new gameplay that will utilize it to its full potential, I'm not really sure which aspects of existing mechanics we should translate. First, there was a time when the graphics improved, then there was network features, and now, I guess you could say it's a return to the programmable era. I think machine intelligence and machine learning will continue to evolve. If you would pour its power into graphics, it will be the best we've yet to see, and I think everyone is talking about in which ways we should use that power. I as well. There's artificial intelligence and many other things I would want to think about. There have been several reports that the PlayStation 5 is capable of advanced machine learning and AI processing. Indeed, there's even a couple of patents that I found floating around which does hint that as well. It's very interesting to see what Sony are planning with the PS5, because obviously next generation consoles do have an obvious impact in games on PC as well, particularly when it comes to the SSD. And let's move over to the post on Reddit. For our context, the post begins, our current gen games, PS4, Xbox One and PC, load around 40% faster when replacing the PS4 Pro hard drive with a SATA SSD, so that brings it from 42 seconds down to 25 seconds. If we run our PC build in combination with an M2 NVMe SSD, we see around 7% faster load times compared to the PS4 Pro with the SATA SSD, even though the NVMe SSD is around 6 times faster. But it gets even worse. When we take the Samsung PCIe card from our server to run the PCB build, we only see around 3% faster loading times compared to the SSD NVMe, which shows there are diminishing returns since current game I/O has to assume hard disks are the baseline. Because of that, we can only expect similar loading time reductions of the PS4 games when played on the PS5. But we were proven wrong with our expectations. Together with our development kits, we've got nothing from Microsoft yet, we received information material which was front and centre about how they continue to strive to make life easier for developers, in order for us to deliver better games faster for players, and how that is a continuation of the groundwork for us to deliver better game, and how that is a continuation of the groundwork laid by the architectural decisions taken by the PS4. Material is not just about new games though, but also about how the PS5 can help next generation games take advantage of its features, particularly with its advanced storage solution. Apparently, and this is what's rather interesting information, they've analysed the I/O behaviour of current gen games and baked the essence of it into what they call high bandwidth cache controller, which can then map PS4 I/O commands into optimised commands for all the new storage solution where appropriate, without having to make changes to the game. And it shows our unchanged game, which was running on development kits, loads a full 32% faster than the PC build with the PM1725A. That's the server card that they mentioned a moment ago. But the material further states that in order to take full advantage of the game, we will have to be patched, and I can't wait to see how fast the game will load once our software engineers have made source code changes to take full advantage of the storage. This is really interesting to me, and if it's true, because obviously at the end of the day it's just a post on Reddit, it would mean that we should see drastically improved loading times for titles which run basically PS4 code without the developers needing to patch anything. They can just run it natively, and it would still improve performance drastically. What we do know about the PlayStation 5, well, I say do know, what we think we know about the PlayStation 5 is that it has 24GB of GDDR6 memory, but furthermore it has DDR4 memory, which appears to be used for SSD caching. The amount here is what's in flux. One source, or actually two sources, have told us that there are two 2GB modules, so that's 4GB total for SSD caching, and another source has told us that there is one 2GB module, which means 2GB total, of course, for SSD caching. Anyway, I think that's just about it for this particular video. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. If you did, then the normal stuff. Like, share, comment and subscribe, because it does help the channel out a ton. You can also find us on Patreon, which is of course linked down below in the description of this very video, and you can also find us on social medias there as well. With all of that said, take care of yourselves. Bye for now.